Hello, David Wagner here. Today I'm going to show you how to make nice pen and ink drawings from a photograph. Pen and ink is the traditional medium for scientific illustration. Here's an example of what we're going to learn. We start with a picture like this fireweed and convert it into a simplified black and white rendition. A bare bones drawing provides an image that emphasizes the critical features of the flower structure. A proper scientific illustration builds on the line drawing by using small dots to add shape, form, and texture. Working with dots like this is called stippling, and it adds a three-dimensional form to your drawing. Let's review the supplies we need. For this project, there are only a very few supplies that are needed to make your ink drawing from a photograph. Now, the first obvious thing is a smooth, hard-working surface. I like a polished stone like this serpentine because it has no grains in it like granite. Another very good thing that works well, looks like whiteboard, but it's very hard and smooth, and this is from shower stall material. A big sheet will do for a lot of people. Something else is to get polycarbonate, sort of like plexiglass. Again, very hard, very smooth, good working surface. Then you'll need some heavy archival drawing paper, smooth, heavy, about 100 pounds. I like plate Bristol or paper for pens. Then you'll need some soft graphite. I think 6B is best. Here's the 6B. Keep it in the wrapper if you can so you don't get it on your finger, or you'll have to wrap it yourself. Here's some nice artists 6B. This is good for rubbings also. You'll need some removable Scotch tape so that you can tape your photo to the drawing paper and then not tear the drawing paper surface when you remove it. You want a nice sharp pencil, hard pencil. I like a 2H or a 4H. Sharp point, the thing about a hard pencil is that it holds a hard point very fine. Then you need some fine pointed pens. And an artist standard are these Micron pens by Pigma. They come in a series of 6 different sizes from 0.2 to 0.5. I usually use the middle ones, and these are archival, non-fading, fine-pointed pens. And finally, a plastic eraser, which is good for erasing the soft graphite. And that's one of the reasons we use a soft graphite, is so it's easily erased. And that's all we need. And now we'll get started with the project. I'm going to use a photograph of the Spring Beauty, Cardamine natalii, one of the ones we call Spring Beauty in our area, because it's a beautiful little flower, and this is quite a simple enough drawing. Now you'll notice that I have trimmed the edge of this a little bit, but otherwise it is an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And what we're going to do is to mark off this area that we're going to draw graphite on the other side. Now I have marked off where I want to fill in with the graphite by holding this up to light so I can see the area that needs to be have its transfer space available, and keep the amount of area where the graphite is being rubbed to a minimum. In other words, we want nice, even graphite, but we want it to be no more than necessary. You'll notice that the 6B graphite makes a very dark covering on this side, and what we're doing is making the equivalent of carbon paper, except in this case it's graphite paper. Now that's done. Now put this stick of graphite away. You don't need it, and you don't want to get close to it. Do your best not to touch the graphite. Now that there's graphite on the back side of this drawing, we'll turn it over and attach it to the drawing paper with some removable tape. I always like to put a little crease in the end so it's easy to pick up. And one here. And then I'll put a little one down here in the corner to help me keep track of what I'm doing. And the next thing to do here is to put little X's on the edge there, which makes it possible to reposition this in case you need to add extra details. So now we're ready to draw. So here we are, ready to do what amounts to a tracing, but it is a transfer, because what I do is to use the hard pencil and just go over the outlines of the flower. We don't need much, just to show the different parts. I've just drawn the stem, and here's one of the buds, and I'm adding just a little bit of form. There's a little leaflet that sticks out here. We'll draw around the edge of the petals. This area is light enough that you can see what I'm doing. Now this takes a while, but don't rush it, because a pen and ink drawing is no better than your pencil sketch or your graphite sketch. And that is exactly what we're doing here. So now we're finished doing the drawing, and there is the basic outline of what we're going to render in ink. And so at this point, we remove the removable tape, and we'll use this tape to stick this up onto a stand that's right in front of the drawing board, because that's going to be our guide. I usually use 2 different size pens for a drawing like this. More complicated ones, sometimes more, but the traditional method of scientific illustration is to use a single, very fine pointed pen, a crow's quill dipped in India ink. But thanks to our microns, we can choose our nibs easily. I'm going to use a number 3 for the bold outlines around the edges of the drawing, and I will use a number 1 for the details and shading. Now, this is something it's going to take a while to do. It is easy, and if you go slowly and don't rush it, you'll be able to have very nice results. Getting skilled with this takes some practice. I think probably the most important thing I learned was to keep doing smooth strokes, stop, and then be able to put my pen down right where I started and continue like that. So these are the broad outlines of the parts of the Spring Beauty. So now that's good. And pretty close to being good enough for a coloring book. In fact, I'd say it is good enough for a coloring book. And all you'd have to do now is just erase those little the light lines, and it's ready to reproduce for the children. Working with the finer pen, number one, the first thing to do is just to take advantage of the details that we put in so that we know what's going on. For instance, the lines of the veins in the petals of the flower, just very lightly. This is a place where we don't really want heavy lines. We just want to emphasize the details. So I've done a little bit of touching up to add a few of just the guidelines of where I'm going to do some additional shading. But this is really all you need for a coloring book. And now our use of the graphite is done. And this is where this soft eraser comes in. Notice how we're left with just the ink. And this is already a nice ink line drawing. And when I'm working with other flowers, I often will stop at this point. I've made this to use as something for coloring. And now comes the finer detail. Now this is going to take some time. I'll do a couple of examples of parts of it and ways to do it, and then we'll show you what the final version should look like. I repeat, this is not fast, but it's easy because you've already given yourself all of the dimensions that you need to make this drawing. So there are a couple of different kinds of techniques to use for these, and I will demonstrate a few. So here is a stem, and I want it to look round. And so what a stipper does is to start putting in lots of little dots around the edges for shading. And I like to do this gives me an idea of where that shading is going to be. But you see, they're all pretty even. Now do that up on one side, and I'll do a little bit up on this side here. Now right now, they are all evenly spaced. But then you come back in here, and when you're stippling, what you do is look for the empty spaces. And you can fill in the empty spaces towards the edge and spread it out a little more towards the middle. And you see we're starting to get a little bit of form of what that roundness looks like, and make it kind of dark right at the edge, and it will make it look like it is a little bit of roundness. So that's a way to make that look round. I'm not going to do it all right now, but we'll go on to some other details. So we'll just take a look at our original and see where we want to put a darker area in the middle of the flowers and emphasize the flower parts. So what I like to do, this is where just nice, bring them together stippling works. The theory is that the dots shouldn't overlap, but it's not absolutely critical. The main thing is to use the field of dots to show areas where it's darker. Now you can get your nose closer to it, but this will just work out fine. And then I like to put down some of the detail of the anthers. Like this. And I'm just following what I see in the photograph and adding really just a little bit of texturing along the sides of the veins. There's a lot of stippling yet to be done in here, but I just want to show how you get started and indicate the fields of areas where you're going to do more stippling and give it shading. I like to point out that there are places where it's nice to take advantage of a little curve in the edge of the leaf and make it look like it's waving or it's undulating, and that gives it some form and texture. So now I continue adding more and more stippling, and this is how the drawing proceeds. Once the drawing is completed, then I add my chop, which is this little mark right here, and what the plant is. This is the Spring Beauty, Cardamine nataliii. And now you know how to draw a flower. Now I have the Western seagull, and almost all of its form is defined by stippling. That is not the usual way to do birds. The first bird that I drew that uses a completely different method of inking was the white-crowned sparrow. Like the seagull, I started with a photograph taken with a telephoto lens. So I zoomed in on the part of the bird that I wanted to draw and blew it up so that I could get a nice image on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. So here's the original from which the drawing was made. And now here is the final ink drawing. You notice there's very little stippling that's done. I've used a variety of techniques, but the one that's most important for me for drawing birds are lots of little short lines. Instead of dots, little tick marks. And so here's the white-crowned sparrow portrait. Here's a yellow jacket I photographed sipping some water, and I have a nice enlargement of it to make my drawing. Here's the stage where I have completed the graphite outline, and then I've inked in just the outline with ink. So here is my line drawing, if you will. This is good for a coloring book. And here is the completed drawing of the yellow jacket. Again, very little shading, just a beautiful exercise in black and white. Here is a California sister, and again, in order to make a drawing, the first step is to put graphite on the back and make a graphite outline of all of the details. Here is an intermediate step to show how the faint graphite outlines are mostly still here in this drawing, and I've only started to do the wing on this side. Again, lots and lots of little tick marks, not stipples, but lots of little lines going fast, fast. And here is the completed drawing of the California sister getting its nitrogen from some coyote scats. I've always liked to draw salamanders. Here's a picture of the northwestern salamander, Amblystoma gracile. The smooth lines and curves of the northwestern salamander make it ideally suited for this kind of an ink drawing with stippling. Just enough stippling to show its beautiful form. And here is a photograph of the Pacific giant salamander, Dicamptodon. And this one has a beautiful modeling that just doesn't get suited to ink stippling. So what I've done is I've used pencil directly on the drawing paper. And here's the completed sketch of Dicamptodon, the Pacific giant salamander. I've used 3 different grades of graphite pencils. Very dark one for the outline, a not quite so dark one for the mottled markings, and then a very pale hard pencil for the background. much more thoroughly completed than could be possible with stippling.